The Herald of Death was the result of Ryusuke's obsession of finding a cure for the curse that was slowly killing Himeko, his daughter. It was a father's obsession gone wrong that killed more than 100 civilians of Dovbruk district that unfortunately, or fortunately depending whom you are asking, saved Himeko's life. This is the conclusion I arrived at after reading through many readables on the Herald of Death and looking at the suspicious little details about Ryusuke. Oh yes, that man is very suspicious. The way he came up to Himeko, questioning about her identity but quickly backing away as soon as Himeko questioned his identity. How he appeared to know more than he let on but pretended to be clueless, the list goes on. So let's start from the beginning of what we know about the Bloodstained Games, Himeko's involvement in it, and how Ryusuke fits in all of this, right afterwards from today's sponsor, BuffBuff. BuffBuff is a safe and reliable top-up service where you can buy stellar jades for cheaper. Just paste in your UID, choose your game server, leave an email address to receive your receipt, and your top-up will be sent to you in no time. There are multiple payment methods to choose from. Personally, I'm surprised to see some familiar names on the list, which is nice because that means I can pay directly from my bank account. So, if you're a spending player and looking to stock up for Silverwolf or the other upcoming Plan Arcadia characters, use my link in the description or scan this QR code to claim extra discount. Big thanks to BuffBuff for sponsoring this video. Now back to the suspicious Ryusuke. The Herald of Death was a supplicant of the Phantasm Moon game 15 years ago. On July 22nd, year 1984 of Arcadian calendar, he showed up at Graphia Academy, killed 22 students, and went on to Dovbruk district where he killed 124 more civilians. This man, who at the time was said to be an unidentified creature, was confirmed to be Marcus Antali in the IPC's case file. He was a scholar from the School of Evolutionary Perfection of the Intelligentsia Guild. According to testimony from his ex-colleague, Marcus was researching a technology related to cellular composite reconstruction prior to the Herald of Death incident. 10 years after the incident, or 5 years prior to the Express Crew's arrival on Plan Arcadia, he was executed. We learn from Asheville that in order to avoid copycats, details of the Herald of Death modus operandi was kept under wraps by the Department of Aberration Defense. This includes leaving out details of his murder trademark, purple painted palm smeared all over the crime scene, something that was left behind in the recent murder case of the Sinwish Syndicate. There are some conflicting information in regards to how the Herald of Death was neutralized. News outlets reported that it was the Department of Aberration Defense that did it. However, according to Himeko, who was also a supplicant of that year, it was her who defeated him.
The Herald of Death was a heartless madman. If I hadn't defeated him then, all of Duomension City would have become his slaughterhouse.
One thing that everyone seems to agree on is that many supplicants that night lent a hand in suppressing the Herald of Death, which costed them their lives and the Phantasm Moon games of that year likely ending with no winner. In the end, nobody knew who got to have an audience with Aha. Now, Ryusuke, Himeko's father, an artist as well as the current dean of the Graphia Academy, was away from Plan Arcadia when the incident took place. He only returned after it was all over and Himeko had already departed from the planet with the Astral Express. All that was left for him to see was a tombstone with Himeko's name on it, which led Ryusuke to believe that Himeko had perished in the massacre. In truth, or at least that's what Himeko said, it was Himeko's way of getting her things in order before saying goodbye to her homeworld forever. She didn't bother leaving a farewell note to her father because he had been absent for most of her life, their first meeting being her mother's funeral when she was 6. He was not even there when Himeko decided to join the Phantasm Moon games or when she was struggling against the Herald of Death.
Strictly speaking, ever since I can remember, his presence in my life has been as thin as the air in space.
Ryusuke reasoned that he had been away for Himeko's sake because he was searching for a cure to the Weathering Curse. This was a curse that every descendant of Graphia suffered from, a price that Graphia agreed to pay in order to seal Plan Arcadia in canvas 10 Ember eras ago. No descendant could escape this terrible fate, all barely living to reach their 30s before their death. Ryusuke lost his wife to it, as she was the descendant of Graphia, while he was only a son-in-law who married into the family. Losing his wife, he was determined not to lose his daughter too. He had tried many remedies but nothing worked. We also know that even Aha cannot lift this curse. Hiro, Himeko's great-great-grandfather who won the Phantom Moon game 400 years ago, got to have an audience with Aha and learned the hard way that the Master of Elation themselves was powerless against this curse. Now, we first heard of the Herald of Death from Himeko. She and Trailblazer arrived in the classroom where the murder of the 22 students happened in 1984. Or rather, in the reimagined version of that classroom, somebody intentionally recreated the crime scene from 15 years ago. Later we learned that it was Ryusuke who did this.
All these years, I've been trapped in this room that represents the past that I imaginated. And I've never left it.
His motive aside, don't you find that weird? Remember, details of the Herald of Death modus operandi has been kept under wraps by officials to avoid copycats. Unless someone was directly involved in the case, say a victim that survived the incident or investigators from the Department of Aberration Defense, nobody should know the details of the crime, let alone what the crime scenes look like. In 4.1, this little detail was what led Asheville to Fullwish as a suspect of the present-day's copycat case. Fullwish is a survivor of the incident 15 years ago, a student of Graphia Academy. She would know how the crime scene looked like. Ryusuke, however, was not in Planet Arcadia when the incident happened. He didn't even see Himeko depart the planet. All that was left for him to see when he returned home was Himeko's tombstone. Yet somehow, he was able to imaginate the classroom where the crime took place and recreate the horror that happened down to the purple painted palms plastered all over the windows. How could he do that when A, he was not present when the incident took place, and B, details about the crime has been kept under wraps by officials? As for Marcus Antali himself, the man believed to be the Herald of Death, there are also some interesting and weird things about him. Notice how I said believed to be because I do have my doubts about the IPC's claim of his identity. For starter, there's the contradiction between how the Herald of Death was described as versus what Marcus Antali's real profession was. When Trailblazer listened from the other side of the classroom door, the sound inside was described as someone treading across sticky floor, as though a painter navigating paint-spilled floor. Himeko described him as someone who basked in the blood splattered everywhere, who wanted the whole world to be his canvas, a deranged artist, she said. Meanwhile, Marcus Antali was a scholar. But I do know someone who is an artist, someone who for some reason knows details of the Herald of Death incident very well. Ryusuke. Secondly, during the incident, it was reported that many civilians were unfortunately caught in combat despite the Department of Aberration Defense's evacuation effort. Some of these civilians were permanently disabled and, get this, could only continue on living the rest of their life in sterile isolation chambers with the IPC's support. Not only that, the IPC's report of this incident also have the final numbers of casualty redacted. Yes, there are 146 civilians in total, but how many were killed and injured, we don't know. Even more suspicious, some of them were missing. So if we put this information together, the IPC redacted the details of casualty of the Herald of Death incident. They are the one providing support to civilians who must live the rest of their life in isolated chambers, i.e., they and only they have access to these people. They were also the one who revealed the Herald of Death's real identity to the public and carried his execution. That, to me, sounds like a cover-up story. Marcus Antali might not be the real Herald of Death. He was a scapegoat, one of the many civilians locked up in the isolation chambers that unfortunately took the blame. If this is true, it will be the least surprising thing the IPC have ever done. Am I saying that Ryusuke is the Herald of Death? He could be. Was he working with the IPC behind the scene to cover up the case? Maybe. Why would they be working together? I don't know. But for argument's sake, let's say that the IPC didn't lie. Let's say Marcus Antali was in fact the Herald of Death. Even then, there are still things that connect him to Ryusuke. Before the Herald of Death, Marcus Antali was a scholar from the School of Evolutionary Perfection of the Intelligentsia Guild. When the school was still active, it was known for its abundance-related research and experiment. If you remember Hule and the Crimson Moon, one scholar from the school once created an artificial crimson moon and transplanted it into a dying patient just to see what it would do to a human's body. Marcus himself was working on a research called Redacted Cellular Composite Reconstruction Technology. As the school was being shut down, Marcus refused to be transferred to another school because he had received funding from an unknown source that allowed him to continue this research. At the time, the research was already at the final stage of clinical trials, which means it would undergo a large-scale testing in humans to evaluate its safety and effectiveness, i.e., he would need volunteers to be his test subjects, human test subjects. Before he was confirmed to be Marcus Antali, what people saw entering Graphia Academy that evening was an unidentified creature. Fulwish, who survived the attack at the school, and eyewitnesses on the street of Dovebrook district said that he had fibrous structure and corolla-like appendages, a plant-like creature, not unlike the Mara-struck people of the Xianzhou. Given the track record of the school, their abundance-related research and experiments, it is likely that Marcus was also researching something related to the abundance, and the Herald of Death was the result of him experimenting on himself gone wrong, hence the plant-like appearance. On that note, he might have also targeted civilians to be his test subjects, considering some of his victims were stated to be missing instead of dead or injured. We don't know the exact number because for some reason the IPC redacted this information, but it could be the case. Now, I did say that these details about Marcus Antali made his connection to Ryusuke more apparent, but how exactly could a scholar from the Intelligentsia Guild who was researching on the abundance be related to an artist from Plain Arcadia? Well, he couldn't be if it was any other artist, but it's Ryusuke we're talking about here, the head of the Graphia family, a grieving husband and desperate father who had been traveling the cosmos in search of a cure for his daughter's sickness. Ryusuke said it himself.
The Elixir Seekers' folk remedies, the Intelligentsia's guild treatments. I tried them all, but nothing could reverse the curse.
The answer was right there all along. Sure, the Elixir Seekers' remedies didn't work, neither did the Intelligentsia Guild treatments, but an abundance research conducted by an Intelligentsia Guild scholar might just work. Surely, if Ryusuke really had been traveling all over the cosmos for a cure, he must have heard of the school and what it was famous for, which eventually led him to Marcus Antali. Remember the mysterious donor that funded Marcus's research? That could be Ryusuke. After all, Graphia family is known to be one of the rich families in Plain Arcadia, owning multiple properties across the planet. Or rather, it used to be. Himeko said by her generation, very little of that wealth was left. Perhaps it was because Ryusuke spent most of it funding the research. And I think this theory sounds more plausible if we remember what happened at the night of the massacre. The Herald of Death went to Graphia Academy and then to Dovebrook District, and you know what those two places had in common? Both were places where Himeko could be. Graphia Academy was where she worked, Dovebrook District was where she lived. Perhaps, aside from kidnapping civilians to be his test subject, his main goal was Himeko. As extensive as his research could be, wouldn't it be best if he could study the very person that this entire research revolved around? Judging from how Himeko had been treating Ryusuke, I think she knows. When Ryusuke toured the Astral Express, he asked Himeko if it was the Phantasmoon Games that cured her of her curse. Standing in front of Trailblazer at that time, Himeko said yes, that was indeed the case. But then, when she was alone with her father at the academy, reading through records of the Phantasmoon Games and whatnot, Ryusuke recounted the history of Hiro, Himeko's great-great-grandfather who won the Phantasmoon Games and learned that Aha could not lift the Weathering Curse, revealing to Himeko that he knew the Phantasmoon Games could not undo the curse. Himeko was lying to his face, yet he didn't call her out on it. Why? Or rather, why did Himeko lie to him when she knew that Ryusuke had the records of past Phantasmoon Games? Surely Himeko knew that Ryusuke could see through her lie. Her father had traveled across the cosmos for a cure. His first stop must have been records of attempts made by their ancestors to lift the curse. But she lied anyway, as if to see how Ryusuke would react to that. When Himeko finally said it, acknowledging that she knew her father must be curious how she was cured, Ryusuke was the one who stopped Himeko from telling him. Playing the part of an understanding father, he said that he would wait until Himeko was ready to tell him. What if it was not Himeko being elusive about her past? What if it was Ryusuke fearing Himeko would expose him of his crime, bringing to light the truth of the tragedy 15 years ago? And here's the thing, right? I still don't know exactly what happened to Himeko. I believe there's too little information to make a solid theory out of at this point, but what I can say is this. The Herald of Death incident had something to do with Himeko's recovery from the curse. Himeko knows this. She knew this, and that was why this incident became her greatest regret in life. All of those students and civilians murdered for the sake of one person's survival, her survival. Of course, she would be haunted by this incident for many years to come after she left Plain Arcadia and never wished to return home. Oh, and before you disagree with me for saying that Himeko worked at Graphia Academy, let me tell you why I think so. Now, here's the part that doesn't necessarily correlate with the theory as a whole, but I just need to address it because I've seen others use this as an argument for the two Himekos in Plain Arcadia theory. No, Himeko was not a student when she joined the Phantasmoon Games 15 years ago. See, when Himeko asked Trailblazer and March to go to Graphia Academy to retrieve her family's mask of elation, she told them to go find her friend, Miss Dolly. Miss Dolly was a teacher at the school. She was the one holding on to that mask for Himeko. Given Himeko's status as an alumni of Graphia Academy, naturally, we would expect her to be taught by Miss Dolly at one point. But instead of calling her her teacher, Himeko said that Miss Dolly was her friend, suggesting that after her time as a student at the academy, Himeko befriended Miss Dolly in her capacity as someone of equal footing, say, a teacher, which Himeko confirmed while they were trying to retrieve the moon from one of the emotes at the gym. Being at the gym, Himeko remembered how she once envied her classmates who could just sprint across the field. This confused March because didn't Himeko once study at Graphia Academy? Does that mean Himeko was the quiet type who didn't participate in gym class? Not quiet, Himeko said.
I'd already graduated by the time I started feeling this way. Due to some circumstances, I went back to my father's school to work.
Himeko worked at Graphia Academy, perhaps as a teacher. That is why she called Miss Dolly her friend. They worked together at the academy. That was why Himeko said Full Wish was the only student who survived the Herald of Death attack at the school despite being at the school herself. She was not a student. And if we follow the timeline of Himeko's departure from Plain Arcadia, we can safely assume that this was her last profession before leaving the planet for good 15 years ago. Another proof of this is Ryusuke's comment about Trailblazer when they were in the classroom with Himeko. He said when he looked at youngsters like Trailblazer, he couldn't help but thought that his grandkids would have been around their age. Now, appearance-wise, Trailblazer is in their early 20s, right? I think we can all agree on that. So, unless Ryusuke supports teen pregnancy, I don't see how he could think that his daughter would have had a 20-something-year-old child in the present. Otherwise, Ryusuke would be implying that Himeko had conceived a child when she was still a student. Even if Graphia Academy was a university and Himeko was in her final year, she would still have had the child when she was 17. Are you following my math? I hope you do. Well, I am late to the party of theorizing about what happened to Himeko, but hey, it's finally here. I hope we get to learn more of what happened to Himeko then because we barely got anything this patch. I know that last time I said there would be more to come, then I proceeded not to post any video for a month, so I won't make any promises for now, but as always, I will see you in the next one.